17 through 25 says, "And when we had come to Jerusalem, the brethren received us gladly." So, boom, right there, that says that the Apostle Paul, he actually made it back to Jerusalem. He met his goal, right? In verse 18, it says, "On the following day, Paul went in with us to James." James is the half brother of Jesus. "And all the elders were present." When they say elders, they are not referring to the old people. They are actually referring to the authority. The elders are like high-ranking authority within the church. Amen. In verse 19, it says, "When he had greeted them, he told in detail those things which God had done among the Gentiles through his ministry." So right there in that particular moment, the Apostle Paul, he begins to testify about all of the amazing things that God ended up doing through him and through his missionary journey, right? He begins to testify to the brothers and sisters in the faith. In verse 20, it says, "And when they heard it, they glorified the Lord." What did they do? "And they said to him," you see, brother, how many myriads or how many thousands of Jews there are who have believed, and they are all zealous for the law. "But they have been informed about you, that you teach all the Jews who are among the Gentiles to forsake Moses, saying that they ought not to circumcise their children, nor to walk according to the customs." So let's stop right there for a moment before you get confused, right? So here we see the elders, at the moment that the Apostle Paul arrives at Jerusalem, they begin to kind of like, they meet and greet him, right? And then he begins to testify. After he testifies, they begin to question him and to drill him. And they begin to say, that a lot of people have been saying, right? And the voice is that you have been teaching Jews not to follow our customs or traditions or the laws that were set forward by Moses, the prophet. And let's continue here. But that was actually them lying. It was them making stuff up, because the honest truth is that the Apostle Paul never told none of the Jews not to continue with their customs, right? He was basically telling the Gentiles, which is the non-Jewish people, once they accepted Jesus and they came to the Lord, he was telling them, you don't have to follow Jewish customs, which makes total sense. How many of you can say amen? Amen. So let's continue in verse 21. "But they have been informed about you, that you teach all the Jews who are among the Gentiles to forsake Moses," or to reject Moses, or not to listen to Moses, "saying that they ought not to circumcise their children, nor to walk according to the customs." In verse 22 it says, "What then? The assembly must certainly meet, for they will hear that you have come. Therefore, do what we tell you. We have 4 men who have taken a vow. Take them and be purified with them, and pay their expenses, so that they may shave their heads, and that all may know that those things of which they were informed concerning you are nothing, but that you yourself also walk orderly and keep the law. But concerning the Gentiles who believe, we have written and decided that they should observe no such thing, except that they should keep themselves from things offered to idols, from blood, from things strangled, and from sexual immorality." And all of God's people say, amen. So as they are questioning the Apostle Paul in that particular predicament, they begin to tell him, well, you're going to have to prove to yourself, because just know that the assembly is going to meet. Just know that the religious rulers, they're going to come together and they're going to begin to question you. So we urge you and we encourage you, if it's true that you haven't been speaking to the Jewish people and telling them not to follow the Jewish customs, then what we encourage you to do is to grab these four men. There are four men that have set themselves apart. They have consecrated themselves to be holy, right? And they have taken a vow that they are not going to shave their heads, right? And that was a way of purification, a way of sanctification for the Jewish people. And you find that in the book of Numbers, right? Where they would actually set themselves apart and they would say, you know what, no razor is going to touch the hair on my head. And these religious rulers, well, these particular church leaders, the elders, they are talking to the Apostle Paul and they are telling him, grab these four men, right? They have taken a vow that they're not going to cut their hair, but now they are ready to. It's like when you start a fast, you have a start and an end time of a fast, right? So they're like, these guys are ready to basically end that vow that they made that they weren't going to shave their head. So they're like, we need you to grab those four men, pay for their expenses so that they can shave their hair, right? And also shave your hair, and then sanctify yourself, separate yourself for 7 days. And after 7 days, this was like a ritual and a tradition and a custom that the Jewish people used to do in order to purify themselves after they had been in contact with people from other nations, with like Gentiles. So it was something that was kind of crazy, right? And the Apostle Paul, he says, okay, that's what you want me to do. I mean, I know that I really don't have to do that to prove myself, but I want to keep peace. I want to keep the peace with everybody. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to listen to you and I'm going to follow with this little ritual that you guys want me to do. Whatever. Okay, let's go. So now, and then they, corrected him and they said, we have been hearing that you have been telling the Jews not to continue or following with the laws of Moses or the traditions or the customs, but of the Gentiles, it's okay. We approve that you've been telling the Gentiles not to follow the customs of the Jewish people, right? That's okay. We've already written it down. We've sent letters that is okay, that they don't really have to follow the exact customs of the Jewish people. So let's jump to Acts chapter 21, verse 26 through 35. Remember, I told you we were going to do some reading today. So we are going to get through the whole Bible together. Not today. Not today, but we are going to get through the Bible together. Amen? But in order for us to get through the Bible, we got to do some reading. Amen? I'm going to try my best to simplify and narrate afterwards, okay? So Acts 21, verse 26 through 35 says, then Paul took the men, and the next day, having been purified with them, he entered the temple to announce the expiration or the end date of the expiration of the days of purification, at which time an offering should be made for each one of them, right? A sacrifice. Mind you, Jesus was the ultimate sacrifice. There was no need for any further sacrifices. But Paul was trying to keep the peace, so he's like, all right, whatever, y'all could do your thing. Verse 27 says, now when the 7 days were almost ended, the Jews from Asia, seeing him in the temple, stirred up the whole crowd and laid hands on him, crying out, men of Israel, help! This is the man who teaches all men everywhere against the people, the law, and this place. And furthermore, he also brought Greeks into the temple and has defiled this holy place. For they had previously seen Trophimus, the Ephesian, with him in the city, whom they supposed that Paul had brought into the temple. So right here, we see that some Jewish people that had come and traveled from Asia, they were basically starting a riot against the Apostle Paul, and they were making up a whole bunch of falsehoods and a whole bunch of lies. They were saying that the Apostle Paul was telling Jewish people not to follow in the laws of Moses and not to continue with tradition or customs, which was an actual lie. They were lying, and the reason for their lying is because they basically wanted the Apostle Paul to get imprisoned or killed. That was their goal. And then they also made up another lie. They said that this guy, Trophimus, that was traveling with Paul, they said that Paul had brought him into the temple. And it was a Jewish custom and tradition not to allow anyone from any other nation to come into the temple, into that particular area of the temple. And so they said that the apostle Paul had like brought in a person, a Greek man into the temple, which was a lie. He didn't do that. They just assumed, and they were just picking a fight, right? Verse 30 says, and all the city was disturbed. What happened to the city? They were disturbed, and the people ran together. They seized Paul. What did they do to Paul? They seized him and dragged him out of the temple. And immediately the doors were shut. They basically kicked Paul out of the temple, right? They dragged him out. In verse 31 it says, now as they were seeking to kill him, news came to the commander of the garrison that all Jerusalem was in an uproar. He immediately took soldiers and centurions and ran down to them. And when they saw the commander and the soldiers, they stopped beating Paul. What did they do? They stopped beating him up. Then the commander came near and took him and commanded him to be bound with 2 chains. And he asked who he was and what he had done. And some among the multitude cried one thing and some another. So let's stop right there for a moment. So in that particular predicament, we see that the people, they're lying about what Paul was doing, and they are stirring dissensions. They form a riot. They begin to start beating the apostle Paul, and in that moment, somebody sent news to the Roman commanders, right? The Roman commander that was in control. At that particular time, Jerusalem was under the control and the occupancy of Rome. And so Rome had Roman soldiers, and a centurion was basically a leader of like 100 people, right? A leading soldier over 100 people. So in that moment, this commander, he grabs the centurion, he grabs some soldiers, and they hear that there's a riot in the city. So they go over there to see what's going on. When they get there, they see Paul getting beat up. He's getting hit hard. And so this commander, he ends up grabbing Paul, and he begins to calm everybody down, like, what's going on? And all of the soldiers, in that particular moment, the people stopped beating on Paul because they saw the Roman soldiers and the authority that had arrived at that particular moment. And so this commander, he begins to ask, what did this man do? Why are people beating on him? And some people were shouting this, and some people were shouting something else. And when he saw that he wasn't getting anywhere, he said, you know what, we gotta grab this guy and we need to get out of here before it gets crazy. How many of you have seen a riot? Have you ever seen a riot? Riots can get out of hand from 0 to 100. Amen? They can go crazy, right? So this commander, he was very smart. He said, you know what, these people are out of control. We need to grab this man and we need to get out of here. And let's continue right there in verse 34. It says, and some among the multitude cried one thing and some another. So when he could not ascertain the truth because of the tumult, he commanded him to be taken into the barracks. So basically, he commanded that Paul be thrown into like a holding cell or a prison. When he reached the stairs, he had to be carried by the soldiers because of the violence of the mob. For the multitude of the people followed after, crying out, away with him! What do you think they wanted to do with Paul? If they were shouting away with him, they wanted to kill him. So Paul literally had to be carried. Do you know what it is to carry somebody? He had to be carried by soldiers and taken out of there. They were rushing him out of there. Let's continue with Acts chapter 21, verse 37 through 40. It says, then as Paul was about to be led into the barracks, he said to the commander, may I speak to you? He replied, can you speak Greek? Are you not the Egyptian who some time ago stirred up a rebellion and led the 4,000 assassins out in the wilderness. So let's stop right there for a moment. So the apostle and speak and make my defense and make my case. And he says, wait a second, do you speak Greek? And then the commander asked Paul, he says, aren't you one of those Egyptians that stirred up a group of 400 assassins and led them into the desert? Are you guys hearing the implications there? Now the commander is saying that the apostle Paul is a sicario. It's a hitman. I'm like, when I was reading that, I was like, yo, these people were crazy. And so, listen, yeah. And so, listen to this. In verse 39, it says, but Paul said, I am a Jew from Tarsus. Remember Saul of Tarsus? That's Paul. In Cilicia, a citizen of no mean city. And I implore you, permit me to speak to the people. He's like, listen, I am a citizen and I demand to speak. I beg you, please give me the opportunity to defend myself. Amen. And in verse 40 it says, so when he had given him permission, Paul stood on the stairs and motioned with his hand to the people. And when there was a great silence, he spoke to them in the Hebrew language, saying, shall we continue here, right? All right, verse 22. We're doing really good. Acts 22. We'll be reading from verse 1 through 21, okay? All right. Brethren and fathers. Actually, let's stop right there for a moment. So the apostle Paul speaks to the commander and he begs him, please let me make my case. And the commander tells him, you know what? I'm going to let you speak. So when he gave him the platform and he gave him the opportunity to speak, the apostle Paul motions everybody with his hands like, settle down, calm down, people. And he begins to make his case. Are you ready? In verse 1 it says, brethren and fathers, hear my defense before you now. And when they heard that he spoke to them in the Hebrew language, they kept all the more silent. Remember, in past weeks, I was sharing with you that the apostle Paul, every time he went into a synagogue, he would immediately find common ground with the leadership of that synagogue, and he would express himself in a way that they would understand that he knew the word, that he was a man that was an intellectual, that he was studied, and that he knew what he was talking about, right? That is exactly what the apostle Paul begins to do here. He begins to speak in his Hebraic or Hebrew language, and immediately he caught everybody's attention like, wow, this man speaks Hebrew. Then he said, I am indeed a Jew, born in Tarsus of Cilicia, but brought up in this city at the feet of Gamaliel, taught according to the strictness of our fathers' law, and was zealous toward God as you all are today. So in that particular moment, the apostle Paul says to everyone, he's like, wait a second, it's important for you to know who my teacher was. Gamaliel was a rabbi, and he was a very well-known rabbi. He was a prominent figure in that particular time, and anyone that was a part of, or anyone that observed Judaism and was in leadership, right, as a religious ruler, they either had some type of contact with Gamaliel or they learned from him. And the apostle Paul is setting allowing everyone to find common ground. He's like, you want to know who my teacher is? My teacher is Gamaliel, right? And he says, I was taught according to the strictness of our father's law, and I was zealous toward God as you all are. I was just like you, he begins to say. And he says here, I persecuted this way to the death, binding and delivering into prisons both men and women. So I was as zealous as you guys are or seem to be right now. And I was actually persecuting the people that followed Jesus, the people that were of this way. I was persecuting them, and I was grabbing men and I